Hey, so this is my buddy Joey Ponarelli here, and he is super cool. So he has a really powerful story about healing from his parents' divorce, and he started a ministry to help children of divorce. And yeah, he's here to tell us about it. So, dude, welcome, Joey.
Thanks so much for having me.
Could you tell us about Restored and the ministry?
Yeah, like you said, Restored exists to help teenagers and young adults who come from broken families. And the best way to explain it is that when your parents separate or divorce, it hurts, it's painful, it's traumatic. And I found that most teenagers and young adults feel alone and they feel uncertain of how to deal with it all. I know that was my story, which I'll get into in a second, but I created Restored to help them, and it's really what I wish I would have had years ago. We give them the practical advice and the tools that they need to cope, heal, and grow after their parents break up so they can feel whole again. And the main way we do that is through our podcast, a blog, and speaking engagements. And we're actually not just trying to help the people who come from divorced families, but also anyone who loves or leads them. Because it can often be confusing if you're, for example, dating someone who comes from a broken family, or maybe you're leading them, you're a youth minister, a pastor, a teacher. You may not know how to talk with them about what they're facing in their life. And so we want to help guide them in helping the children of divorce. And so we so passionate about it. Part of the reason I'm so passionate about it, like you even mentioned, is because that's my own story. I'll never forget the day that my parents separated. I was 11 years old, and my mom broke the news to me and my siblings that my dad would no longer be living with us. In fact, they were getting a divorce. And as soon as I heard that, my whole world just shattered. It came completely out of the blue. And the 11-year-old me just didn't have the ability to cope with that news. And so I just ran and hid in the closet and cried. And sitting there, just a million thoughts raced through my head. But I was so worried about my family, my siblings, my parents. I didn't know what would happen now. And I immediately felt abandoned. I felt unwanted. And I felt like I wasn't good enough. And so I dealt with those wounds for years. Even now, I still wrestle with them. I found so much healing along the way. But even now, I still wrestle with them. And following that day, I became very angry, bitter, sad. Dealt with anxiety. And in an attempt to numb the pain that I was experiencing, I turned to pleasure. A friend of mine introduced me to pornography. And so I fell into that for a while. And even as a young boy, though, I noticed that after I was viewing porn, it was just making me feel so empty. In the moment it felt good, but then afterward I just felt so empty. And I knew, even as a boy, I knew I wanted to be happy, and that wasn't making me happy. So I needed to change. Around that time I heard a talk by Jason Everett, who I'm sure a lot of your viewers are familiar with that. But he's a chastity speaker, so he speaks on love, relationship, sexuality, and he talked about pornography, and he said that porn is really the perfect way to destroy your ability to love, your ability to be masculine. And it's really the perfect way to poison your future marriage. And so he really helped me change. He's been a mentor over the years, and just incredible, incredible man. Super helpful for me. Also met some great friends, solid Catholic friends, and I noticed that they were happy too. They were joyful, and I wasn't. I wanted what they had. And after time, I realized that they had a deep relationship with God, that they lived a life of virtue, that they were making use of the sacraments. Just a really deep interior life, a deep personal relationship with God. And so I started to develop that. I started to learn more about my faith, develop a prayer life, and really, really helped me so much. But I still felt broken. Yeah. And so I realized this principle that is true for all of us in life, and that's after sin, the thing that holds us back most from becoming who we're born to be, from reaching our potential, is our untreated brokenness. And so because I felt so broken, I knew I needed to heal. I looked around for some help. Right? Someone talking about the effects of divorce on the children, and I found nothing. There was some academic research on it, but that was about it. There was nothing practical to help me heal. And so I noticed also that friends of mine were struggling with this. My siblings, people I didn't even know, I saw, and that they were struggling. And so I decided to do something about it years later. And so I started Restored, and that's our mission, is really to help them heal so that they can thrive.
Dude, that is awesome. That is so powerful, man. Thanks for sharing. Do you have any advice for like somebody because there's tons of people out there who are struggling internally with their parents' divorce. Do you have any advice for somebody struggling with that, and places they could go or advice for healing from that.
Totally, yeah. I have a few points. Before I get into that, though, you hit on a really important point. I think that most of the time we don't talk about it. It is something that we keep inside, and that's a problem. Because this really does affect us in very real ways. And a lot of times we're not very vocal about it, but if you actually start listening to the children of divorce, if you start reading the research, which I've been doing for years, you'll notice that this really negatively affects people like us. And so there's a real need. But the first step, of course, is recognizing the problem. And so just want to give focus to that. And there's a lot of research, again, that proves this point. And if you just hear the stories, you can tell too. So the first point I would say is just reflect on your story. This advice comes from Adam Young. He's a counselor in Colorado, in Fort Collins, actually.
Sweet.
And he has a podcast called The Place We Find
Colorado.
Ourselves.
Good.
So he has a podcast called The Place We Find Ourselves, and it's just phenomenal. And in it, he explains that one of the things that we really need to do to heal is reflect on our story. Life is so busy. There's so many things that we do in life that we rarely take time to just sit down and reflect on our past. And he says our stories are like a movie or a novel, right? There's different people involved, different settings, different things that happen to us, and we really need to reflect on it. And by doing that on a neurobiological level, that's actually healing for your brain. And he gets into that more in the episode. If you want to talk about it, I'm happy to. But that's really important. So reflecting on your story, engaging your story is the way that he talks about, and that's healing. And going a step further, telling it to someone, right? Someone you trust, someone who is worthy of hearing your story. Don't just tell it to anyone, but that's in itself is healing too. And again, on a neurobiological level, it's healing for your brain.
Yeah.
That's tip number one. The second one, which may sound like cliche advice, but it's writing your story or writing about the difficult things that you're facing in life. There's a PhD psychologist from the Harvard Medical School called Dr. Susan. There's a PhD psychologist from the Harvard Medical School, Dr. Susan David. She wrote a phenomenal book called Emotional Agility. And in the book, she talks about this professor, Professor James Penbaker. And one day, this guy, after he had gotten married, he was probably a few years into marriage, him and his wife started doubting their marriage.
Wow.
And so he fell into depression, and they were just really struggling. And one day, he's sitting at home, this is a while ago, he saw his typewriter. And so he just started typing about everything he was experiencing, left nothing out. And something amazing happened after he did this for a few days. The depression left him. And so he spent the next 40 years, the rest of his life, just studying the link between writing and emotional processing. And what he found was that basically people who write about difficult and significant emotional events in their lives are happier, they're less depressed, less anxious, less visits to the doctor, and so on. There's a ton of research behind this. And Dr. Susan David, who wrote the book I mentioned, she says there's been thousands of studies that have confirmed this. And so his advice, which, again, great tip, is to just do it for 20 minutes a day. And what he would do in his research, he would take a group of people, split them into two. To one group, he would say, just write about everyday things. And to the other group, he would say, write about emotional significant events that have happened in your life. And they would do this for a few days. Again, 20 minutes a day, that's it. And then they'd come back. And after repeating this study, he found what I mentioned. People were less depressed, less anxious. They were happier overall. And so there's just huge benefit to getting things out of your head, out of your chest, putting it onto paper, and it's actually healing on a clinical level.
Wow.
That's number two. Number three is a spiritual tip. So those two are kind of human tips, which we need to be careful that we don't just focus on the spiritual in healing, because that's actually a temptation in the religious world, is just to focus on the spiritual. We also need the human. And so it needs to be a balance between the two. And so obviously something that's been so healing for me in my life is developing a relationship with God, especially through the sacraments. And so grace just has amazing healing powers. And so adoration, just so important to spend time with Jesus. Just let him look at you. Because so often what we do, and what I've done so much in my life, is I might give Jesus part of my heart.
Yeah.
I might let him into part of my life, but I don't really want him in this area and that area. And so to truly heal, we need to open up. We need to show him our brokenness, because he's the divine physician, right? And if you ever go to the doctor, you're not going to get healing unless you show them what's wrong, right? You need to show them what's wrong, and then by showing them that, then they can say, okay, this is how we heal, or they can heal you in some way. And so really opening up and just not being afraid to let him see your brokenness. It doesn't make him love you less, right? He's not ashamed of you. It actually makes him love you more.
Yeah.
And that's been so healing for me. So those 3 tips, engaging your story, reflecting on it, writing about it, and then adoration of the sacraments. So healing, so helpful.
Also, that's like super helpful for all areas of like wounds from childhood or adulthood that we need to bring to God. That's so helpful, Absolutely. Man. Do you have any words of encouragement for anybody listening who is struggling from their parents' divorce?
Yeah. So much to say. The first thing is, you're not doomed to repeat your parents' mistakes. That's one thing that a lot of us fear. We're afraid that we might get divorced one day. We're afraid that we might do something stupid, like if there was an affair in our parents' marriage, we're afraid we might do that. And so I just want to remind everyone, you're not doomed to repeat your parents' past, their mistakes. You can write your own story, and that you have to go through healing to do that. But imagine that you feel broken, right? You just feel really sad, kind of depressed, you're anxious, you just feel very broken at a low place in life. But instead of resigning to it, you get the courage to dedicate yourself to healing, right? And you walk through the steps of healing on the human level and the spiritual level. And before long, right, it does take time, but before long, you feel different, right? Life isn't perfect, but you're better, you're stronger, and you're more confident, you're more courageous, and you're more of the person that you really desire to be, that you want to be, that you were born to be.
Dude, that is so helpful. Thank you so much, man. It's going to help so many people. Do you have any words of encouragement for somebody that's struggling from their parents' divorce?
Yeah, the first thing is, you're not alone. You really are not alone. There's so many people like us, and Restored exists to help you, so please let us help you. Second thing is, you don't have to repeat your parents' past. You don't have to repeat their mistakes. You can write your own story. Because we fear that. We fear repeating the mistakes that they made that led to the marriage falling apart. But you don't have to. You can write your own story. It takes healing. You have to go through the healing process and really be intentional about, building virtue and all of that. But you don't have to repeat their past. You can write your own story. But imagine this. Imagine that you feel broken. You feel maybe depressed, anxious, all those things. But instead of giving up, you muster up the courage to seek your own healing. And so you go through the healing process, you get the help that you need. And it takes time, but before long, you notice that you're different. Life's not perfect, right? Suffering hasn't disappeared, but you're better. You're stronger, more confident, more courageous. And that's really what we want to help the teenagers and young adults who come from broken families to accomplish. We want to help you to become the people that you were born to be. And so just always remember, don't give up. Even when life gets hard, when it gets discouraging, you actually can learn to deal with a lot of the pain and the problems that you're facing in a much more constructive way than you're probably dealing with them now.
Where can they go to look you up, like your ministry, all the resources that your ministry has to offer? Where do they go? Yeah,
so the best place to start is restoredministry.com. That's our website, restoredministry.com. Ministry is just singular. And on there, they could listen to the podcast, they could read our blog, they could find a counselor or a spiritual director, they can join our online community, they can hear talks that I give, they can share their own story anonymously. We take it and we turn it into a blog article. And so the website's really the best place to start, but after that, I would say the podcast.
Great, dude. Thank you so much. And I'm going to put below the website link to his ministry so you guys can find it there. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This is
Thanks
awesome, man. Totally.